The cold seeped through the thin wool of her dress, a familiar ache that settled deep in her bones. Ilara shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. The cellar of the Weary Traveler Tavern was her prison, as it was most nights. Dank air, thick with the smell of damp earth and soured ale, filled her lungs with every shallow breath. Her stepmother Isolde had been particularly cruel today. A dropped plate, a muttered complaint from a drunken patron, any excuse was enough. The heavy oak door at the top of the stone steps was barred from the outside. It always was. A sliver of moonlight, thin and pale as a bone, cut through a high, grime-covered window, offering the only light. It illuminated swirling dust motes, tiny galaxies of filth in the darkness. Her stomach twisted with a hunger so sharp it felt like a blade. Isolde had made sure she missed the evening meal. Again. Ilara sank down onto a stack of empty grain sacks, the rough burlap scratching her skin. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and useless. She refused to let them fall. Crying changed nothing. It only left her feeling weaker, more hollowed out than before. She was an omega, the lowest of the low, rejected by her pack after her parents' death, taken in by Isolde only to be used as a free servant, a punching bag for her frustrations. Invisible, worthless. The words were a constant, droning litany in the back of her mind, Isolde's voice echoing in the empty spaces of her heart. She pressed her forehead against the cold, rough-hewn stone of the wall. Just survive the night. That was her only goal. Survive the night, and then the day, and then the night again. An endless, bleak cycle. A sudden, violent crash from above ripped through the suffocating silence. Ilara flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. It sounded like the tavern's main door splintering. Shouts erupted. Isolde's shrill, angry voice, followed by the deeper, panicked tones of the few lingering patrons. Then, a new sound. A voice so low and resonant it seemed to vibrate through the very stone beneath her. It was not a shout, but it cut through the noise with the authority of a landslide. Silence followed. A heavy, terrifying silence. Ilara held her breath. Every muscle in her body tensed. Who was that? What was happening? Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crossed the floorboards directly above her head. They moved with a purpose that sent a fresh wave of fear through her. They stopped at the cellar door. She heard the thick iron bar being lifted, the screech of metal on wood. No. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. No one ever came down here at night. No one but Isolde. The lock clicked. The door groaned open. A massive silhouette blocked the doorway, plunging the cellar back into near-total darkness. The figure was immense, wider than the frame, taller than any man she had ever seen. He stood there for a long moment, a predator tasting the air. Ilara scrambled backward, pressing herself into the corner, trying to melt into the shadows. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. He descended the stone steps, each footfall a soft, measured impact that echoed in the confined space. He moved with a lethal grace that contradicted his sheer size, a panther in the dark. As he reached the bottom, he stepped into the single thin beam of moonlight, and she saw him. He was a creature of midnight and mountains, carved from granite and fury. His shoulders were impossibly broad, straining the seams of his dark leather tunic. A thick, dark cloak, stained with mud and something that looked unnervingly like dried blood, was clasped at his throat. His hair was black as a starless night, long and untamed, falling around a face that was all hard planes and sharp angles. A rugged, dark beard shadowed a jaw that could have been cut from stone. But it was his eyes that stole the air from her lungs. They were the color of steel in moonlight, cold and piercing, and they found her in the darkness as if she were bathed in sunlight. The moment their gazes locked, The world tilted on its axis. The air in the cellar crackled, suddenly thick and electric. A jolt, sharp and stunning as a lightning strike, shot through her body, starting from the point where his eyes met hers and spreading like wildfire through every vein. It was a feeling she couldn't name, a pull so profound it felt like a physical rope tugging at the very core of her being. A golden thread, shimmering in the space between them, visible only to her soul. Recognition, a word that bloomed in her mind without thought, without reason. She saw him go unnaturally still. The immense power that had been radiating from him in waves of controlled menace suddenly focused, sharpening to a single terrifying point. On her. His pupils dilated, swallowing the silver of his irises until his eyes were deep, black pools of intensity. A muscle in his powerful jaw jumped. He took a single, slow step toward her. Ilara's mind screamed, danger. This was danger on a scale she had never imagined. This man was not just a traveler or a bandit. He was something more, something primal. But her body betrayed her. Instead of cowering, she felt an insane urge to lean into the pull, to take a step toward him. The frantic hammering of her heart softened, slowing to a deep, resonant beat that seemed to echo the cadence of his own. The cold that had plagued her for years was suddenly gone, replaced by a spreading warmth that started low in her belly. He stopped a few feet away, his shadow engulfing her completely. He lifted a hand, large and calloused, and for a terrifying second she thought he meant to strike her. She flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, a lifetime of abuse conditioning her response. She waited for the blow. It never came. Slowly, she opened her eyes. His hand was frozen in the air between them, his fingers slightly curled. A look of raw, agonizing conflict twisted his hard features. It was as if he were fighting a war within himself, his arm trembling with the effort to stop its own movement. Mine. The word was a guttural growl torn from his throat. It was not a question or a statement, but a declaration of absolute, undeniable fact. A claim. Ilara's breath hitched, her mind reeled, trying to make sense of the word, of the feeling coursing through her. Mine? What did he mean? I don't know you, she whispered, her voice trembling and weak. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, the cold steel warming to molten silver. The change was so swift, so profound, it made her dizzy. You do, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. And I know you. He finally lowered his hand, balling it into a tight fist at his side. The tension in his body was a palpable thing, a coiled spring of immense power. She wanted to run, to scream, to hide, but she was trapped. Trapped by the barred windows, the single door he now blocked, and by the invisible, unbreakable tether that now bound her to this terrifying stranger. Her initial resistance, born of fear and a lifetime of self-preservation, was crumbling against the overwhelming tide of the bond. Her instincts, so long suppressed, were screaming a single impossible truth. Mate. The word echoed in the deepest part of her. A forgotten song she suddenly remembered the lyrics to. Who are you? She managed, finding a sliver of her stubborn will. He watched her, his gaze intense, searching. He seemed to be looking past her worn dress and bruised skin, past the fear in her eyes, and seeing something deep inside her. Something she didn't even know was there. My name is Kale, he said, the name sounding ancient and powerful on his tongue. I am the alpha of the mountain clans. An alpha? Of course. The sheer dominance pouring off him was unmistakable. But not just any alpha. There was a weight to his presence, an aura of command that spoke of more than just a clan leader. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely audible. A flicker of something, regret, frustration, crossed his face. I was tracking raiders. Men who have been plaguing the lowlands, stealing supplies, taking people. Their trail ended here. At this tavern. So that was the crash. He had not come for her. The thought brought a strange, sharp pang of disappointment that she immediately crushed. Why would she be disappointed? This man was a walking storm, and she was a broken sapling. There are no raiders here, she said, her voice gaining a little strength. Just us. There were, he corrected, his voice flat and certain. They are gone now. The implication was chilling. He had dealt with them. He looked around the cellar, his gaze sweeping over the damp stone and cobwebs, his lip curling in disgust. His eyes landed back on her, huddled in the corner. Why were you locked in here? He demanded, the question sharp as a shard of glass. Ilara flinched at his tone. She looked away, her gaze falling to her hands, twisted in the fabric of her dress. I displeased my stepmother. The air temperature in the cellar seemed to drop by 10 degrees. A low, animalistic snarl rumbled in Kale's chest. It was a sound of pure, unrestrained fury, and it made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. She locked you in a cellar, he stated, his voice dangerously soft. Ilara said nothing, just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He took a step closer, and this time she didn't flinch away. The warmth from his body reached across the small space, a comforting heat against the pervasive cold. No one will ever lock you away again, he vowed, the words a solemn oath sworn on steel and shadow. He reached out again, slowly this time, as if approaching a frightened animal. He stopped just short of touching her cheek, his large, calloused fingers hovering in the air. She could feel the heat of him, smell the scent of pine, winter air, and something else. Something uniquely him. Something that made her feel safe. How was that possible? She had just met him. He had broken down a door and radiated enough violence to level the whole village. And yet, her soul was settling. The constant gnawing anxiety that was her daily companion was receding for the first time in years. He seemed to be waiting for her permission. Hesitantly, shakily, she leaned forward just a fraction of an inch, her cheek brushing against the tips of his fingers. A wildfire of sensation erupted at the point of contact. A jolt of pure energy, golden and warm, flooded her system. It was not just a feeling. She could almost see it. A wave of light that pushed back the shadows in the cellar and in her heart. Through his touch, a torrent of images and emotions flooded her mind. Not his, but something else. She saw a man's face, scarred and cruel, sneering as he pocketed a small leather pouch. She felt the cold satisfaction of a deal made in bad faith. She smelled the cloying scent of Isolde's cheap perfume. She gasped, pulling back as if burned, her eyes wide with shock. What was that? She breathed, stumbling back a step. Kyle's eyes narrowed in confusion, then sharpened with sudden understanding. He looked from her face to his hand and back again. What did you see? He asked, his voice urgent. A man. A deal. My stepmother. She stammered, trying to make sense of the fragmented vision. Kyle's gaze was piercing. He looked around the cellar again, his eyes landing on a small discarded object near the steps. A carved wooden wolf, no bigger than her thumb, clearly dropped in a hurry. The raiders, he murmured. She has been trading with them, sheltering them. He strode over and picked up the small carving. He held it for a moment, then turned and held it out to her. Touch it, he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. What? Why? Just do it, he urged. Please. Her hand trembled as she reached out. Her fingers brushed against the smooth, worn wood of the wolf. The world dissolved. It was not a fragmented vision this time. It was a deluge. She was standing in the tavern's common room, But it was hours ago. She saw the leader of the raiders, the same cruel-faced man from her first vision, handing a heavy purse to Isolde. He spoke of a rendezvous point in the Ghostwood Pass, of a shipment of grain and weapons. He boasted of their last raid on a northern settlement, of the fear in the villagers' eyes. She could feel the worn wood of the carving in his pocket, feel his greasy satisfaction, taste the bitter ale on his tongue. The vision shattered, and she was back in the cellar, gasping for air, her hand clamped over her mouth. She swayed, the world spinning around her. Strong arms caught her before she could fall. Kyle pulled her against his chest, his solid warmth a grounding anchor in the dizzying vortex of her senses. One arm wrapped securely around her waist, the other hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. "Easy," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. Just breathe." She leaned against him, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her power, if that's what it was, had never manifested like this before. Sometimes she would touch things and get a faint echo of an emotion, sadness from her mother's locket, anger from a discarded weapon, but never this. Never a full, vivid experience. What is happening to me?" she cried, her voice muffled against his tunic. "You are a resonator," he said, his voice filled with a strange mix of awe and grim certainty. "A psychometric empath. It is a power thought lost to the world. You can read the memories of objects." A resonator. The word sounded foreign, impossible. "I don't understand." He held her a little tighter. "My presence," he explained, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Our bond. It is amplifying your ability, unlocking what has been suppressed." He was the catalyst. Their connection was the key. He held her for a long moment, letting her absorb the shock. His presence was a fortress, shielding her from the dregs of the vision and her own panic. Finally, he gently set her back on her feet, though his hands remained on her arms, steadying her. His silver eyes were intense, a plan already forming behind their depths. "Ilara," he said, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "I need your help." She stared at him, bewildered. Him? The alpha of the mountain clans? Need her help? The rejected Omega who couldn't even keep from dropping a plate? "These raids are part of something bigger," he continued, his voice grim. "A conspiracy that reaches far beyond these lowlands. I have been hunting the men responsible for months, but they are like ghosts. They leave no witnesses, no trails." He gestured toward the wooden wolf still clutched in her hand. "But you can make them talk." He was proposing an alliance, a deal. "Help me," he said, his gaze locking with hers. "Travel with me. Use your ability to help me unravel this plot. In return, I swear on my life, I will free you from this place. I will see you protected, cared for. You will never be locked in a cellar again. You will never be anyone's servant again." Freedom. The word was a splash of water in a desert, a concept so foreign she'd almost forgotten its meaning. To leave this tavern, to leave Isolde, to never again feel the sting of a slap or the ache of hunger. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. But to go with him? This powerful, dangerous man who claimed she was his? Who made her body sing and her mind scream in equal measure? It was trading one cage for another, wasn't it? A gilded cage, perhaps, but a cage, nonetheless. And yet, when he looked at her, she did not feel like a possession. She felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. He saw not the clumsy, worthless Omega, but a resonator, someone with a rare and valuable power, someone he needed. Was this what it felt like to have worth? She looked from his earnest, intense face to the damp, miserable walls of her prison. There was no choice. There was never really a choice at all. "I'll help you," she said, her voice small but firm. A wave of relief so profound it was almost visible washed over his features. The fierce tension in his shoulders eased. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Good. We leave now. Before your stepmother has a chance to rally any village guards loyal to her coin. He turned and ascended the stairs in 2 powerful strides. Ilara followed, her legs shaky but determined. As she stepped out of the cellar and into the tavern's common room, she took her first breath of free air. The room was a wreck. An overturned table, shattered mugs, and the still forms of 2 men in rough spun clothes near the splintered remains of the front door. Kale had indeed dealt with the raiders. Isolde was nowhere to be seen. She had likely fled upstairs to hide. Kale didn't spare the room a second glance. He strode to the door, pulling his dark cloak tighter around himself. He paused on the threshold and looked back at her. "Stay close to me," he ordered. The words were a command, but they were layered with a deep, protective undercurrent. She hurried to his side, and together, they stepped out into the cold, moonlit night. The wind was sharp, but for the first time, it didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like the promise of a new beginning. They traveled for hours under the silent watch of the moon, Kale setting a relentless pace that pushed her to her limits. He moved through the shadowed forests and rocky foothills with the quiet confidence of a creature born to the wild. He had offered to carry her, an offer she stubbornly refused. This was her first act of freedom, and she would walk it on her own 2 feet. He seemed to respect her silent declaration, slowing his pace just enough for her to keep up, his large form a constant, reassuring presence at her side. The bond between them hummed, a low, steady vibration that warmed her against the mountain chill. It was a constant source of both comfort and confusion. Her body craved his proximity, her skin tingling whenever he brushed against her, while her mind was still reeling from the sheer impossibility of it all. Finally, as the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of gray and rose, he led her to a hidden cave nestled in a rocky outcrop. A small, smokeless fire was already burning within, tended by a man who rose to his feet the moment they appeared. He was leaner than Kyle, but still powerfully built, with a stoic face and watchful eyes. He wore the same dark leathers, and a sword was strapped to his back. His gaze flickered to Ilara, assessing and curious, before landing on Kale with unwavering loyalty. "Rafe," Kale grunted in greeting. "Your Majesty." The man, Rafe, replied, his voice a low baritone. He bowed his head slightly. "Your Majesty?" Ilara's blood ran cold. She stared at Kale, her mind struggling to process the title. "Alpha of the Mountain Clans," he had said. He had conveniently left out the part about being a king, the Alpha King. Kale saw the shock and dawning fear on her face. He shot Rafe a look that could have frozen lava. "Not now, Rafe," he growled. He turned to Ilara, his expression softening, the hard lines of his face creasing with something that looked like regret. "Ilara, I can explain." "You're a king?" she whispered, the words feeling foolish on her tongue. It felt like something out of a child's story. "I am," he admitted, his voice low. "Kalen of the House of Oros, the exiled king of this realm." Exiled. The pieces clicked into place. The secrecy, the tracking of raiders himself, the small camp instead of a palace. This wasn't just a mission. It was a war to reclaim his throne, and she was now standing in the middle of it. The feeling of being a pawn returned with a vengeance, sharp and bitter. "This changes everything," she said, her voice flat. She took an involuntary step back. "No, it doesn't," he insisted, stepping forward, closing the distance between them. "My promise to you remains the same. The deal stands." "The deal?" she scoffed, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in her throat. "The deal was to help an alpha track some bandits, not to get involved in a war for a throne. You lied to me." "I omitted," he corrected, his jaw tight. "It was not my intention to deceive you. My identity is a danger to anyone who knows it. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" She shook her head, feeling the fragile trust she had started to build for him shatter. "You used me. You needed a resonator and you found one locked in a cellar. It was just convenient." The hurt in his eyes was so raw and immediate it stunned her into silence. His face, usually a mask of command and control, was suddenly open and vulnerable. "It was not convenient," he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "It was fate. Do you think I do not feel this? This bond between us? The moment I saw you, the world stopped. For the first time in years of darkness and exile, there was light." He reached for her, his hand hesitating in the air before gently cupping her jaw. His thumb stroked her cheek, sending shivers down her spine. "You are not a tool to me, Ilara. You are my mate, my queen. Whether I sit on a throne or sleep in a cave, that is the only truth that matters." His sincerity was a palpable force, breaking down the walls she was trying so desperately to rebuild. How could he look at her, the rejected Omega, the tavern wench, and see a queen? The sheer exhaustion of the night, the shock of the bond, the terror of the visions, and now this revelation, it was all too much. A sob broke from her lips, a sound of pure, undiluted despair. The dam of her control finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, hot and fast. Her body began to tremble, not from cold, but from years of pent-up pain and fear finally being released. She was overwhelmed, terrified, and so tired she could barely stand. In an instant, Kale's arms were around her, pulling her into the solid wall of his chest. He held her tightly, protectively, as if he could absorb her pain into himself. "I'm sorry," she wept into his tunic. "I'm so sorry, I'm so tired." "Shh," he murmured, his deep voice a soothing balm. "I've got you. You are safe. Let it out." And she did. She cried for her lost parents, for the years of abuse, for the loneliness, for the fear of this new terrifying path she was on. She cried until she was empty, until there were no tears left. Throughout it all, he held her. He didn't offer platitudes or false promises. He just held her. A silent, unshakable mountain in her storm. Rafe had discreetly moved to the mouth of the cave, standing guard, giving them their privacy. When her sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, he guided her over to a pile of furs near the fire. "You need to rest," he said softly. He sat down, pulling her with him so she was nestled against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. He draped a thick fur blanket over her. The warmth of the fire, the softness of the fur, and the solid, steady presence of him beside her was a cocoon of safety she had never known. Sleep pulled at her, heavy and insistent. Just before she drifted off, she felt his lips press a soft, reverent kiss to the crown of her head. "I will not let anything happen to you," he whispered. "I swear it." She slept. For the first time in a decade, she slept without fear, without nightmares. When she woke, it was to the gentle crackle of the fire and the scent of roasting meat. The cave was warm and filled with the soft light of late afternoon. Kale was sitting across the fire from her, sharpening a wicked-looking dagger with a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape of stone on steel was a strangely comforting sound. He looked up as she stirred, his silver eyes immediately finding hers. A small, almost smile touched his lips. "You are awake." She sat up, the fur pooling around her waist. She felt rested. More than rested. She felt clear. The fog of exhaustion and fear had lifted. I'm sorry," she began, feeling a flush of embarrassment at her earlier breakdown. "Do not apologize for having feelings, Ilara," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. He set the dagger and stone aside. "You have been through more than most could bear. You have earned your tears. Rafe handed her a piece of roasted rabbit on a flat piece of bark. Her stomach rumbled, and she accepted it gratefully. The meat was savory and delicious, and she ate with a hunger she hadn't realized she had. As she ate, Kale explained the situation in more detail. He had been the Alpha King for 5 years, ruling from the capital city of Silverwood. His reign had been marked by fairness and strength, but it had earned him enemies. His most trusted council advisor, a man named Valerius, had orchestrated a coup. Valerius had used lies and manufactured evidence to turn the council against Kale, accusing him of tyranny and dark magic. Before Kale could prove his innocence, an assassination attempt forced him to flee to the mountains, to the loyal clans who had sworn allegiance to his family for generations. Valerius had installed himself as Lord Regent, claiming Kale was dead and ruling in his stead. "Valerius is a snake," Kale said, his voice laced with cold fury. "He was like a brother to me. I trusted him completely." The betrayal was a fresh wound, Ilara could see. It was the source of the deep-seated pain and mistrust in his eyes. "These raids," Kale continued, "they are not random. They are orchestrated by Valerius. He is weakening the borderlands, sowing chaos, making the people desperate for a strong hand to restore order. His hand. But I have not been able to prove his connection." "Until now," Ilara finished for him, understanding dawning. He nodded, his eyes boring into hers. "Until you. Your ability is the key to exposing him. We need proof. Something undeniable that will turn the council and the army against him." The weight of her new role settled on her shoulders, but this time it was not terrifying. It was purposeful. She was not a victim being dragged into a war. She was a weapon. The one weapon the king needed to win. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady. A flicker of admiration crossed his face. He reached into a leather satchel and pulled out an object wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it carefully. It was a signet ring, heavy and gold, bearing the crest of a snarling wolf. "This was taken from a captain loyal to Valerius," Kale explained. "We captured him last week. He died before he would talk. But he wore this ring. It was a gift from Valerius himself." Ilara's heart began to beat faster. This was it. The critical clue. She took a deep breath to steady herself. "Give it to me." Kyle hesitated, his brow furrowed with concern. "It may be unpleasant. The visions can take a toll." "I can do this," she insisted, meeting his gaze with a determination that surprised even herself. He nodded slowly and placed the heavy ring in her outstretched palm. The moment her skin touched the cold metal, the world fractured. The cave, the fire, Kyle's worried face. It all vanished, replaced by a lavish, tapestry-hung chamber. She was looking through the eyes of the captain, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Across a polished mahogany desk sat a man with silver-streaked dark hair and a handsome, calculating face. He wore the fine silks of a nobleman, Valerius. He smiled, a thin, cold expression that did not reach his eyes. "The raids are proceeding as planned, my lord," the captain said. "Excellent," Valerius replied, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "The more chaos in the countryside, the more the people will cry out for my leadership. Kalen's loyalists are scattered and weak." Then, another figure stepped out of the shadows. Ilara's blood turned to ice. It was Isolde, her stepmother, dressed not in a tavern keeper's drab clothes, but in a gown of dark, expensive velvet. She looked perfectly at home in the decadent room. "The king's loyalists are not your only problem, Valerius," Isolde said, her voice sharp and contemptuous. "The old prophecies speak of a resonator, a power that could expose everything, a power tied to the true king's bloodline." Valerius waved a dismissive hand. "A myth, a children's story." "Is it?" Isolde countered, her eyes glittering with a feverish light. I have spent years searching for any hint of such a power. My late husband, Ilara's father, was a scholar obsessed with it. He believed the gift ran in his family line, dormant for generations. That is why I took the girl in after he died, to watch her, to ensure she never realized what she was. A cold, horrifying understanding washed over Ilara. Her entire life, the abuse, the isolation. It was not random cruelty. It was a calculated plan to keep her broken, to keep her power suppressed. She is nothing, Isolde spat, her voice filled with venom. A weak, sniveling Omega. There is no power in her. I made sure of it. I trust your methods, Valerius said smoothly. He turned his attention back to the captain. There is another matter. A loose end. Kaelin's sister, Serena. She escaped during the coup and is in hiding with loyalists in the south. Find her. Bring her to me. She will be useful leverage, should Kael ever resurface. The vision swirled, the room dissolving into a maelstrom of deceit and malice. Ilara felt the captain's cold ambition, Valerius's lust for power, and Isolde's deep, twisted jealousy and fear. She was violently wrenched back into her own body, gasping, the golden ring falling from her nerveless fingers and clattering onto the stone floor. Ilara! Kyle was instantly at her side, his hands on her shoulders, his face a mask of alarm. They're working together, she choked out, her voice raw. Valerius. And my stepmother. Kael's face hardened into a terrifying mask of rage. The temperature in the cave plummeted. The fire seemed to shrink away from the sheer cold fury radiating from him. Isolde, he snarled, the name a curse. It's worse, Ilara gasped, pushing through the psychic residue of the vision. He knows about your sister, Serena. He sent men to capture her. The rage on Kael's face was wiped away, replaced by a stark, bone-deep fear. It was the first time she had seen him truly afraid, and it was a terrifying sight. Serena, he breathed, his voice cracking. He wants to use her as leverage, Ilara explained, her words tumbling out. And Isolde, she knew about me. She knew what I was. My father was researching my abilities. She kept me weak on purpose, to stop me from ever discovering it. The pieces of her past slammed into place with brutal clarity. Her father's dusty books, Isolde's rage whenever she found Ilara reading them, the systematic crushing of her spirit. It was all a lie, a cage built of cruelty and fear. Kyle's hands tightened on her shoulders, his knuckles white. He was looking at her, but his gaze was distant, his mind racing. The conspiracy was deeper and more personal than he had ever imagined. Rafe, he bellowed. The stoic guard was inside the cave in a heartbeat. Your Majesty. Send word to Torvin in the south, now. Tell him Serena is in danger. Valerius knows where she is. He is to move her to the Shadow Peak Sanctuary immediately. Go. Rafe nodded once, his face grim, and disappeared from the cave. Kael turned back to Ilara, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. Fury, fear, and a burning protective intensity that was focused entirely on her. He will not touch my sister, he vowed, his voice a low growl. And they will pay for what they did to you. Both of them. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence simmering in his eyes. This is my fight, Ilara, he said, his voice raw. I never should have dragged you into it. I can take you somewhere safe, far from all of this. She looked at him, at this powerful king brought to his knees by fear for his family and fury for her pain. She saw the man beneath the crown, the alpha beneath the dominance, and she felt her own resolve harden into steel. She was not the weak, sniveling Omega from Isolde's venomous description. She was a resonator. She was his mate. And they had hurt the people she now considered her own. No, she said, her voice clear and strong. She pulled one of her hands free and gently touched his cheek. You didn't drag me into this. They did. The day Isolde took me in. This has been my fight all along. I just didn't know it. She met his gaze, her own eyes burning with a fire he had ignited. They used me as a pawn to keep you weak, she said, her voice dropping, fierce and low. Now I will be the weapon that brings them down. This is not just your fight anymore, Kale. It's ours. A look of profound awe and love dawned on his face, chasing away the shadows of his anger. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a brief moment. Mine, he whispered, the word no longer just a claim of possession, but a promise of partnership. Acknowledgement of an equal. We need a plan, she said, her mind racing. A way to expose them both. A way to get your throne back. Kyle opened his eyes, the silver depths now clear and focused. The king had returned, but he was no longer alone. Valerius trusts your stepmother, he mused, a dangerous glint in his eye. And your stepmother thinks you are a broken, powerless girl. We can use that. A plan began to form between them, a risky and audacious trap. They would leak false information, a rumor that Ilara had escaped the tavern and was fleeing north, alone and terrified. They would let Isolde, desperate to recapture her secret weapon, lead them right to Valerius. She will want to bring you to him herself, Kale reasoned, to prove her worth, to prove she can control you. It's too dangerous, Ilara realized as the full scope of the plan settled in. I would be the bait. I will not let you out of my sight, he vowed. I will be in the shadows, every step of the way. But you are right. It is a risk. It's a risk I'm willing to take, she said, surprising herself with her own conviction. This was her chance to face her tormentor, not as a victim, but as a warrior, to reclaim her own life. Let's set the trap. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Rafe returned with word that Serena was safe, a wave of relief that allowed Kale to focus entirely on the plan. They moved their camp to the edge of the Ghostwood, the location Ilara had gleaned from the raiders' memory. Kale's scouts, silent shadows in the trees, spread the rumor of her escape. They made it seem desperate, a flight of panic. It did not take long for the bait to be taken. A report came back. Isolde, accompanied by a small contingent of Valerius's personal guard, was heading towards the Ghostwood. The trap was set at a crumbling, ancient ruin deep within the forest, a place of neutral ground according to old treaties, a place Valerius might feel comfortable meeting. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the center of the moss-covered stone circle. She was dressed in a simple, travel-stained dress, her hair artfully disheveled. She was playing the part of a terrified runaway, but beneath the facade, she was anything but. Kale was hidden in the dense woods just beyond the clearing, along with Rafe and a dozen of his best warriors. The bond between them was a taut wire of anticipation. She could feel his presence, his focused intensity, his protective fury. It was a shield around her heart. Look at me. His voice echoed in her mind, not spoken, but felt through the bond. She subtly lifted her head, her gaze sweeping the tree line. I've got you. A wave of calm washed over her. She was not alone. She didn't have to wait long. Isolde emerged from the trees, her face a mask of triumph and contempt. She was flanked by 4 guards in the silver and black livery of the Lord Regent's Guard. Well, well, Isolde sneered, her eyes raking over Ilara with disgust. Look what the cat dragged in. Did you really think you could escape me, you pathetic little rat? Ilara forced herself to tremble, to look afraid. I just wanted to be free, she whimpered. Isolde laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Free? You were born to serve, to be nothing. Your only value is what I allow you to have. She strode forward and grabbed Alara's arm, her fingers digging in like talons. Lord Valerius will be very pleased. He was beginning to doubt my usefulness. You will prove him wrong. As Isolda's fingers clamped down on her skin, Alara felt a jolt, not of power, but of pure, cold hatred. This woman had stolen her life. Right on cue, Valerius himself stepped into the clearing, flanked by more guards. His handsome face was smug, his eyes alight with victory. "Isolde, my dear," he said smoothly, "you have delivered as promised." His gaze fell on Alara, dismissive and cold. "So this is the girl. She doesn't look like much." "She is nothing," Isolde spat. "A vessel. And I am the only one who knows how to control her." "A vessel for what, Isolde?" A low voice boomed from the shadows. Every head whipped around. Kale stepped out from behind a massive, ivy-covered monolith. He was not the cloaked exile from the tavern. He was the Alpha King. He radiated power and authority, his presence so immense it seemed to bend the light around him. His silver eyes were burning with a cold, white-hot rage. Valerius's face went pale with shock. "Kaelin, you're supposed to be dead." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," Kyle growled. Rafe and his warriors materialized from the trees, surrounding the clearing, swords drawn. Valerius's guards drew their own weapons, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Panic flashed in the Lord Regent's eyes. Isolde reacted faster. With a snarl, she yanked Alara back, pulling a thin, wicked-looking dagger from her sleeve and pressing the blade to Alara's throat. "Stay back!" she shrieked, her eyes wild with cornered animal fear. "Or the girl dies." The blade was cold against Alara's skin. She could feel a strange, oily substance on it. Poison. "Let her go, Isolde," Kyle said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. The air grew heavy, charged with his barely contained power. The leaves on the ground began to tremble. "You think I'm afraid of you?" Isolde hissed, pressing the blade harder. A thin line of blood welled up on Alara's neck. "This little bitch is your mate, isn't she? I can feel it. The connection between you. That makes her your weakness." A devastating, inhuman roar of pure fury erupted from Kale's throat. It was not a sound a man should be able to make. It was the sound of a god of the wild unleashed. The world exploded in a wave of golden light that radiated from him. The ground shook. The nearest tree splintered, its trunk cracking under the sheer force of his power. His eyes were no longer silver, but blazing gold, pupils slit like a predator's. He took a step, and the ground cracked beneath his boot. But Alara was not just a damsel in peril. She was not a weakness. She was a weapon. As the poisoned blade bit into her skin, as Isolde's terror and malice flooded her senses, Alara focused. She reached out, not with her hands, but with her mind. She pushed past the oily residue of the poison and touched the core of the dagger itself. And then, she touched Isolde. It was not a vision this time. It was an assault. She didn't just see Isolde's memories. She ripped them from her mind and broadcasted them for all to see. The clearing was filled with phantom images, a swirling vortex of Isolde's deepest, darkest secrets. They saw her poisoning her own husband, Alara's father, his research clutched in her hand. They saw her years of methodical abuse, the beatings, the starvation, the verbal degradation designed to shatter a child's spirit. They saw her secret meetings with Valerius, her lust for power, her bitter, all-consuming jealousy of a dead woman and her gifted child. A wave of pure psychic feedback erupted from Alara, channeled through the bond and amplified by Kale's raw power. Isolde screamed, a high, piercing wail of agony as her own vile memories consumed her. She dropped the dagger, her hands flying to her head as if to hold her skull together. She collapsed to the ground, twitching and whimpering, her mind utterly broken by the force of Alara's unleashed ability. In the stunned silence that followed, Kale moved. He crossed the clearing in a blur of motion, a shadow of vengeance. Valerius, his face a mask of horror at the secrets just revealed, barely had time to raise his sword before Cale's hand shot out and seized him by the throat. Cale lifted the Lord Regent off the ground with one hand, his golden eyes blazing down at the traitor. "You conspired against your king," Cale snarled, his voice a low thunder. "You hunted my sister. You aligned yourself with this filth." He gestured to the whimpering form of Isolde. "Your treason ends now." Valerius clawed at Kyle's hand, his face turning purple. "Stand down," Cale commanded, his voice ringing with the absolute power of the Alpha King. Valerius's guards, their will completely broken by the display of power and the horrifying revelations, dropped their swords as one. Rafe and his men moved in, securing the guards and dragging the catatonic Isolde to her feet. Cale finally released Valerius, letting him drop to the ground, choking and gasping. "You will stand trial before the full council," Cale decreed, his voice echoing in the silent clearing. "They will see the truth you tried to bury, and then you will be executed." The fight was over. The moment the immediate danger passed, the immense strength that had filled Ilara drained away, leaving her weak and trembling. The cut on her neck stung. Cale was at her side in an instant, the golden light in his eyes receding back to worried silver. He gently tilted her chin up, his gaze fixed on the cut. "The poison," he murmured, his face grim. Before she could react, he lowered his head and pressed his mouth to the wound. A jolt of pure, clean energy shot through her, far more powerful than their first touch. It was not a vision, but a cleansing fire. She felt the poison being drawn from her, neutralized by his power. The sting vanished, and a feeling of warmth and profound peace spread through her. He lifted his head, his eyes dark with emotion. He tenderly brushed a strand of hair from her face. "It's over," he whispered. She looked at the defeated forms of her tormentors, at the loyal warriors standing guard, and at the powerful king whose gaze held only her. She was free. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I told you," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "It's ours." The journey back to the capital city of Silverwood was a world away from their flight into the mountains. They rode at the head of a growing army, as loyalist garrisons and clans, hearing of the king's return and Valerius's capture, flocked to their banner. Ilara rode beside Cale, no longer a runaway, but a queen, returning to her rightful place. The fear and uncertainty that had been her constant companions were gone, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. Cale had her treated by his personal healer, a kind, elderly woman who pronounced the cut on her neck already healing, with no trace of poison left. Cale's intervention had not only saved her, but accelerated the healing process. They arrived at Silverwood to the sound of cheering crowds and ringing bells. The council, presented with the irrefutable evidence of Valerius's treason and Isolde's crimes, witnessed firsthand by the guards at the ruin, had unanimously voted to reinstate Cale as the rightful Alpha King. The palace was a breathtaking structure of white stone and gleaming silver, a fortress and a work of art all in one. But Ilara felt no intimidation. After sleeping in caves and facing down traitors, a palace held no fear for her. Cale led her to the royal wing, to a suite of rooms that overlooked the sprawling city. It was larger than the entire tavern she'd grown up in, with a soft bed, a warm hearth, and a balcony that offered a stunning view of the sunset over the mountains. For days, she recovered. Kyle was a constant presence, a quiet guardian. He would sit with her for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. He brought her meals himself, brushed her hair when she was too tired, and held her when the echoes of the past threatened to surface in her dreams. He was not just a king, he was her mate. tending to her, caring for her, grounding her. One evening, as they stood on the balcony watching the twilight settle over the kingdom, he turned to her, his expression serious. "The trials are over," he said, his voice low. "Valerius has been sentenced to execution. Isolde, her mind shattered by your power, will live out her days in the deepest cell of the citadel's prison." Justice. It was a strange, hollow feeling. She felt no triumph, only a quiet finality. That chapter of her life was truly closed. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft. Kyle took her hands, his large, warm palms enveloping hers. His silver eyes were filled with a deep, vulnerable emotion she was beginning to recognize as love. "Our deal is concluded," he said formally. "I promised you freedom, protection, and care. You are free to go wherever you wish. I will provide you with a fortune, a guard, a home anywhere in this kingdom you desire. You have earned it 1,000 times over." Her heart clenched. He was offering her an exit, an honorable discharge from their arrangement. Was that what she wanted? To leave him? The thought was a physical pain, a tearing sensation in her chest where the bond resided. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, his grip on her hands tightening. "No," he said, his voice raw. "What I want is for you to stay, not because of a deal, not because of the bond, but because you choose to." He raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I love you, Ilara. You are the other half of my soul. This palace is just stone and silver without you. This kingdom is just land. You are its heart. You are my heart." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy. "I choose you, Kale," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll stay." A breathtaking smile transformed his rugged face, a true, radiant smile that lit him up from the inside. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Her laughter echoed on the balcony, free and unburdened. He set her down, his hands framing her face. "Then be my queen," he said, his voice husky. "Rule by my side, my equal in all things." "Yes," she breathed, her heart overflowing. "Yes." He kissed her then. Not a gentle, comforting kiss, but a deep, passionate kiss full of love, promise, and the fierce, possessive fire of a king who had finally found his queen, 3 months later. The morning sun streamed into the vast royal library, illuminating the golden dust motes dancing in the air. Ilara sat at a large oak table, surrounded by ancient tomes and scrolls. She was no longer the haunted, waif-like girl from the tavern cellar. Her hair, once dull and stringy, now shone like polished chestnut, and her cheeks had a healthy, rosy glow. She wore a simple but elegant gown of forest green, the color bringing out the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. She was not just reading, she was studying. Her father's research, recovered from Isolde's hidden cache, was spread before her. She was learning about her own power, about the history of resonators, and how their abilities had shaped the kingdom for centuries. Her power, once a source of terror, was now a tool she was learning to master. With Kale's help, she could control it, focus it. She had become an invaluable advisor, able to verify treaties by touching the seals, to root out spies by handling their correspondence, to understand the truth where others only saw deception. She was no longer invisible. She was essential. The library doors opened and Kyle strode in, his presence filling the room as it always did. He smiled when he saw her, the smile that was reserved only for her. "Hiding in here again, my love?" he teased, his voice a low rumble. She looked up, her own smile blooming in response. "Learning. There is so much I never knew." He came to stand behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her and resting his chin on her head. He looked down at the ancient, spidery script of the book she was reading. "You have a council meeting in an hour," he murmured into her hair. "They want your assessment of the trade agreement with the southern provinces." She leaned back against his solid chest, a sense of peace settling over her. "And what does the king think of the agreement?" "The king thinks the southern duke is a liar," he growled softly, "but he is waiting for his queen to confirm it." She chuckled, a light, happy sound. This was their new normal, a partnership, a balance of power and love. Later that day, there was a ceremony in the throne room. It was not a coronation, but a formal presentation. Kyle stood before the assembled council, nobles, and clan leaders of the realm, his hand held firmly in hers. "You all know the story of my exile and return," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "You know of the treason that nearly broke our kingdom. But what you do not know is that our victory was not won by my hand alone." He turned to face her, his silver eyes glowing with pride and love. "This is Ilara of the House of Voros. She is the last of the Resonators. She is the one who uncovered the conspiracy. She is the one who faced down the traitors. She is my mate, and she is your queen." He knelt before her, in front of the entire court. A collective gasp went through the room. A king did not kneel. But Kale was not just a king. He was her mate. He took her hand and produced a simple, elegant ring of silver, forged to look like two intertwined wolves, their eyes set with tiny diamonds that glittered like starlight. "Ilara," he said, his voice clear and strong for all to hear. "Will you be my wife? Will you be my partner? My love? My queen? For all of our days?" Tears of overwhelming happiness streamed down her face as she looked down at the incredible man kneeling before her, the Alpha King, who saw a queen in a broken girl in a cellar. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Always. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. The court erupted in thunderous applause. He rose and kissed her, sealing their promise before the entire kingdom. That night, they stood on their balcony once more, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. The cool night air was a gentle caress. Ilara twisted the new ring on her finger, the silver cool against her skin. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Kale came up behind her, wrapping her in his arms, his familiar warmth cocooning her. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "It is a symbol," he murmured against her skin, "that you and I are intertwined. One cannot exist without the other." She leaned her head back against his shoulder, her heart full to bursting. "I still can't believe this is real. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to wake up back in that cellar." His arms tightened around her, a fiercely protective gesture. "That will never happen. That part of your life is ash. I have you. You are safe." They stood in silence for a long moment, simply breathing together, their hearts beating in the same rhythm. "You know," she said, a playful tone entering her voice for the first time, "for a man who was so intent on rescuing me, you made a terrible first impression." He chuckled, the sound a deep vibration against her back. "Oh? And how is that?" "You broke down the door," she said, turning in his arms to face him, a teasing smile on her lips. "My stepmother was going to take the cost of that door out of my food for a year." He feigned a look of deep thought. "A worthy sacrifice, I think. I found you, did I not?" "You did," she agreed, her smile softening. She reached up and traced the hard line of his jaw. "And you are the best thing that has ever happened to me." "Was I the best?" he asked, his eyes glinting with possessive fire as he lowered his head, his lips hovering just over hers. "Or was I simply the first man to break down a door for you?" Even though you did break my stepmother's door, she whispered against his mouth, I suppose I can forgive you. I am relieved, he murmured, before closing the small distance between them. He kissed her with all the passion and devotion of a king who had found his entire world, and in his arms, under the stars of their kingdom, the rejected Omega who had been taken away by an exiled king finally, truly, came home. She was not just a mate, or a queen, or a resonator. She was Alara, and she was loved.